The Intergalactic Hospitality Commission had built the galaxy's most successful entertainment empire on a simple principle. There was nothing tourists loved more than authentic, primitive experiences that didn't involve actual discomfort, danger, or inconvenience. Their cultural preservation protocols had successfully identified and protected over 40,000 charming indigenous civilizations across 17 spiral arms, turning subsistence farmers and Stone Age hunter-gatherers into profitable vacation destinations for sophisticated beings seeking authentic encounters with their evolutionary past, which made their spectacular misclassification of humanity as a tourist attraction all the more entertaining. Tourism director Flux's Vibe had constructed his career around the art of identifying marketable, primitive cultures before they accidentally developed beyond their commercial appeal. His office occupied the premium entertainment district of the Commission's headquarters, where holographic displays showcased the galaxy's most popular destinations, authentic cave painting experiences on Grexmoor, traditional pottery workshops with the simple folk of Zentauris, and meditation retreats among the peaceful tree dwellers of Kappa Centauri. Earth had been categorized as charming backwater preserve, suitable for ecotourism, after an evaluation process that had followed protocols refined over millennia of successful primitive culture management. The assessment had been thorough, the methodology had been proven, and the conclusion had been absolutely catastrophically profitable. Until it wasn't. The evaluation team had been impressed by humanity's commitment to maintaining traditional lifestyles despite having achieved interstellar travel capability. Their first contact protocols had been conducted through what humans called their Cultural Heritage Demonstration Program, a collection of historians, anthropologists, and traditional craftspeople who had approached galactic tourism with the enthusiasm of museum curators finally getting to show off their favorite exhibits. Cultural ambassador Tobias Riverstone had arrived at the Commission's evaluation center wearing hand-woven period clothing, carrying examples of traditional woodworking and metalsmithing, and presenting what he earnestly described as authentic historical lifestyle preservation initiatives. The evaluation team had been charmed by his dedication to maintaining primitive technologies and cultural practices, despite clearly having access to more advanced alternatives. Observe their fascinating cultural commitment, resort manager Glipsunny had noted approvingly, as she watched the human delegation demonstrate traditional farming techniques, folk music, and something called heritage cooking methods to the assessment board. They voluntarily maintain pre-industrial lifestyles as a form of cultural preservation. It's like finding a civilization that has chosen to be its own living history museum. The humans had been refreshingly authentic about their tourism potential. When asked about their technological infrastructure, Ambassador Riverstone had smiled warmly and described their historical preservation communities and traditional lifestyle demonstration sites. When questioned about their entertainment offerings, he had mentioned their cultural festivals and authentic craftwork experience programs, with the sort of genuine enthusiasm that made tourism executives reach for profit projection calculators. Experience coordinator Zamarelax had been particularly excited by humanity's cultural presentations. They've maintained functioning examples of pre-spaceflight technology, she had reported to her supervisors. Working windmills, traditional blacksmith forges, communities that use animal-drawn transportation by choice. Their commitment to historical authenticity is remarkable. Tourists would pay premium rates to experience genuine primitive lifestyle immersion. The humans had passed every test designed to identify commercially viable primitive cultures. They demonstrated traditional crafts with obvious expertise, maintained agricultural communities that appeared to operate without advanced technology, and had actually invited the evaluation team to participate in seasonal festivals that seemed completely divorced from galactic technological standards. Their presentations emphasized cultural continuity, traditional values, and something they called living history preservation that made tourism planners giddy with marketing possibilities. Absolutely perfect, cultural curator Biff Authentic had concluded after reviewing the final assessment reports. They've achieved the impossible, a civilization that has maintained authentic primitive culture while having the infrastructure to safely accommodate sophisticated tourists. We could market them as the galaxy's premier authentic historical experience destination. The Vexlure Entertainment Syndicate had been monitoring this evaluation process with the sort of commercial interest that had made them the galaxy's premier vacation experience providers. As an entity that had built its fortune by transforming interesting primitive cultures into luxury resort destinations, they viewed the Commission's identification of authentic historical civilizations as a renewable resource that required proper commercial development. The entertainment mogul, Krex Party, had studied the human cultural assessment files with growing excitement. 17 habitable worlds, with maintained primitive infrastructure, abundant authentic cultural experiences, and a population that specializes in historical demonstration programs. He had reported to the Vexlure Board of Directors. Their cultural preservation sites are already configured for tourist education programs. They're essentially operating pre-built theme parks that just need proper commercial management. The Vexlure business model was elegantly profitable. Identify authentic primitive cultures, establish luxury resort facilities that provided tourist access to genuine historical experiences, and monetize traditional lifestyles through carefully managed cultural interaction programs. They had perfected this approach across hundreds of primitive worlds, turning subsistence living into subscription entertainment services that operated within the technical boundaries of cultural preservation law. The humans present an unprecedented opportunity. Entertainment mogul Krex Party had continued, his executive tentacles sketching resort development plans on the holographic display. Their historical preservation communities are already configured for tourist interaction, their cultural demonstrations could support year-round vacation programming, and their commitment to traditional lifestyles accidentally modernizing their tourist appeal. The Vexlure had tested human tourism readiness with a series of carefully planned cultural exchange programs, beginning with small-scale visitor experiences that should have established standard tourist primitive interaction protocols. Instead, the humans had responded with elaborate educational presentations and offers to expand their cultural demonstration programming. They're actually expanding their historical preservation sites to accommodate more visitors. Resort Development Manager Plex Vacation had reported with satisfaction after the third successful cultural exchange. Their communities are volunteering to demonstrate additional traditional crafts and lifestyle practices. They seem genuinely excited about sharing their cultural heritage with galactic tourists. The Vexlure had interpreted this response as confirmation of human commercial cooperation and had proceeded with full-scale resort development operations. Their first target had been New Williamsburg Heritage Site, a thriving human historical preservation community that operated as a regional cultural education center. The site had been converted to a luxury tourist destination within 6 days through standard resort infrastructure installation that the Vexlure considered routine vacation industry development. The human cultural preservationists had responded with the sort of desperate resistance that primitive communities typically displayed when facing tourist commercialization, but their protective strategies had seemed almost quaint compared to proper resort security techniques, heritage preservation protocols instead of commercial resistance, educational documentation instead of legal challenges, and cultural protection philosophies that appeared to prioritize historical accuracy over tourism revenue. They're using their museum staff as cultural defenders, guest experience manager Trixie Relax had observed with something approaching confusion as she watched human heritage specialists attempt to maintain historical authenticity using techniques designed for educational programming rather than commercial resistance. Their most aggressive protective strategies are designed to preserve cultural accuracy rather than prevent tourist access. It's almost touching in a commercially naive sort of way. New Williamsburg's conversion had displaced 800 million humans from their traditional cultural preservation activities and eliminated a significant portion of their regional historical education programming, and the Vexlure had expected immediate cooperation from Earth's cultural leadership. Instead, they had received a formal heritage preservation communication requesting clarification of tourist development terms and offering to establish a commission to investigate the unfortunate cultural disruption that had led to the site's commercialization. Perhaps they need a clearer demonstration of tourism development benefits, entertainment mogul Krex Party had concluded, already planning his next resort expansion project. The systematic conversion of Prairie Folk Village and Artisan Craft Colony had followed the same pattern, with human cultural sites falling to Vexlure tourism development strategies that seemed centuries ahead of anything the preservationists could feel. The cultural damage had climbed steadily. 1 billion displaced heritage specialists, 2 billion disrupted traditional communities, approaching 3 billion humans whose cultural preservation activities had been destroyed, and still the humans continued to respond with educational initiatives rather than commercial accommodation. At what point, Resort Development Manager Plex Vacation had wondered aloud during a strategic planning session, do we start to question whether this is actually entertaining anymore? They're not even putting up proper tourist industry cooperation. The answer to that question had arrived in the form of a single communication from Earth, transmitted through cultural channels that no human heritage organization had ever used before. The message had been brief, professional, and delivered in a tone that suggested the sender was no longer interested in educational programming protocols. Vexlure Entertainment Syndicate. This is Captain Ezra Steelwind of Terran Cultural Defense Force. Your tourism development operations have resulted in cultural warfare against human heritage preservation sites. This constitutes hostile commercialization under both Terran and Galactic cultural protection law. You have 72 hours to restore all heritage sites and submit to cultural preservation tribunals. Failure to comply will result in the implementation of Heritage Protection Protocol. Your vacation packages have been cancelled. Entertainment mogul Krex Party had received this transmission with the sort of amused contempt typically reserved for threats from amateur tour guides. Terran Cultural Defense Force? He had laughed, sharing the message with his entertainment team. They've never mentioned having cultural defense forces before. Their assessment files list only heritage preservation communities and traditional craft demonstration programs. The Vexlure response had been their traditional resort development notification delivered through every tourism channel they could access, accompanied by detailed marketing projections of what they intended to do to Earth's cultural sites once their cultural defense force had been appropriately incorporated into vacation programming. They had prepared for what they assumed would be humanity's final, desperate attempt at cultural preservation, with the confidence of entertainment professionals who had never encountered primitive cultures that could resist commercialization effectively. What they had discovered instead was that the humans they had been culturally colonizing for the past year represented approximately 9% of Earth's actual technological civilization, and that the heritage preservation sites they had been converting were specifically designed to maintain historical authenticity rather than demonstrate contemporary capabilities. Captain Ezra Steelwind had spent 10 months staring at authorizations that had fundamentally altered his understanding of his own species' technological development. The documents had been transmitted through communication networks that officially didn't exist, bearing technological seals that suggested Earth's civilization had capabilities that had never been mentioned in any cultural demonstration. Heritage Protection Protocol, he had read aloud to Commander Octavia Ironforge in the secured command center aboard the technological vessel Anachronism. All Terran cultural operations are hereby authorized to transition from historical demonstration configuration to full technological deployment. Tourism regulations are suspended. Mission parameters: complete restoration of heritage preservation sites. Ironforge had raised an eyebrow as she reviewed the technological specifications that accompanied their new cultural protection model. Sir, according to these documents, we've been conducting this entire cultural exchange with our historical education department. Not historical education, Commander, living history programming. Steelwind had pulled up the classification files that detailed the fundamental difference between the two cultural activities. Everything we've demonstrated to Galactic tourism has been specifically designed for maintaining historical authenticity rather than showcasing contemporary technology. Traditional craft preservation, pre-industrial lifestyle maintenance, heritage community education programs. The transformation of the Anachronism had been remarkable to witness. Systems that had appeared to be simple cultural documentation networks had revealed themselves as technological analysis computers, capable of processing millions of individual historical variables simultaneously. What had seemed like heritage preservation terminals had deployed cultural protection strategies that could neutralize entire tourism industry operations. The ship's power systems, which had been operating at what everyone assumed was historical demonstration capacity, had been running at approximately 6% of their actual technological potential. "Sweet mother of temporal mechanics," Ironforge had whispered as she watched the ship's true technological systems come online for the first time. "We're not a heritage preservation vessel, we're a technological fortress." The human cultural fleet that had approached the Vexloria position had looked identical to the heritage demonstration operations that had been entertaining tourists for the past year, which had given entertainment mogul Crek's party false confidence as he prepared what he assumed would be the final commercialization of their brief cultural resistance. His analysts had projected approximately 200 human heritage vessels, which seemed about right for a primitive culture making its last desperate attempt at cultural preservation. What his analysts had failed to detect was that these ships were no longer pretending to be historical education programs and traditional craft demonstration sites. The engagement had lasted exactly 7 minutes and 31 seconds. When it was over, the Vexia Entertainment Syndicate had been reduced to a collection of cancelled vacation packages and refunded tourist deposits, and the human cultural fleet had suffered 0 heritage losses and minimal historical disruption. "Impossible," entertainment mogul Crek's party had gasped into his emergency tourism transmitter as his resort empire's commercial infrastructure collapsed around him. "Your assessment files said you were primitive culture preservationists. You're supposed to be authentic historical attractions." Captain Steelwind's response had been delivered with the same educational courtesy that had characterized human cultural communications for the past 2 decades. "Entertainment mogul Crek's party, you appear to have confused our commitment to historical preservation with an inability to implement contemporary technology. We are indeed cultural preservationists. We simply happen to be exceptionally advanced at technological applications when our heritage sites require protection." The news of the Vexloria Syndicate's tourism annihilation had spread through the Commission's entertainment networks like a cultural wildfire, leaving a galaxy full of tourism directors trying to process what they had just witnessed. The same species that had spent 20 years hosting craft festivals and requesting permission for minor cultural demonstration expansions had just demonstrated technological capabilities that made the galaxy's premier entertainment corporations look like amateur tour operators with improvised vacation programs. Tourism Director Flux Vibe had convened an emergency session of the Cultural Assessment Review Board to address what was being called the Human Heritage Paradox. The conference chamber had been packed with resort managers, cultural analysts and entertainment executives, all of whom were trying to understand how they had been so spectacularly wrong about humanity's true technological nature. "The fundamental question," Flux Vibe had announced to the assembled experts, "is not how we miscategorize their primitive culture status. The question is what tourism classification encompasses a species that possesses civilization destruction-level technological capabilities, but chooses to use them only when their historical preservation sites require defense." Resort manager Glip Sunny had stood from her position at the assessment table, her hospitality appendages arranged in what humans would have recognized as a gesture of profound cultural confusion. "Director, if I may point out the obvious contradiction, we weren't wrong about their cultural preservation commitment. They genuinely are heritage specialists who prefer historical demonstration to technological exhibition. We were wrong about what those preservation preferences implied regarding their capacity for contemporary applications." The human cultural delegation had returned to the Commission's headquarters 3 weeks later, aboard the same vessel that had once been called the Heritage Ambassador. The ship looked identical to its previous historical demonstration incarnation, but now everyone knew that its humble appearance concealed technological systems that could neutralize entire entertainment industry operations without violating galactic cultural protection laws. Cultural ambassador Tobias Riverstone had resumed his position at the heritage preservation table with the same gentle professionalism that had characterized human cultural interactions for the past 20 years. The other species representatives had regarded him with the sort of nervous respect typically reserved for barely contained technological forces. "I trust," Riverstone had said, addressing the assembled tourism delegates with his usual soft-spoken courtesy, "that the recent cultural adjustments have clarified any misunderstandings about humanity's position in galactic heritage preservation. We remain committed to historical authenticity and traditional lifestyle demonstration programs." The Commission had unanimously voted to reclassify humanity from charming backwater preserve, suitable for eco-tourism, to voluntarily primitive advanced technological civilization heritage hazard, a category that had been created specifically for their situation and would likely bankrupt any tourism company that tried to calculate appropriate liability insurance. The irony, Experience Coordinator Zamorelax had observed during the closed session that followed the reclassification ceremony, is that we were actually correct about their fundamental cultural philosophy. They do prefer historical preservation to technological exhibition. They are genuinely committed to traditional lifestyle maintenance, and they really do consider cultural commercialization professionally objectionable. We simply fail to understand that professional objections to tourism development and technological inability to resist commercial operations are entirely different cultural concepts. The Vexlure Entertainment Syndicate had filed for tourism bankruptcy protection within 18 hours of their cultural destruction, offering settlements that included the restoration of all converted heritage sites, compensation for cultural damages, and the surrender of their entertainment leadership for commercialization crimes prosecution. The humans had accepted the terms with the same gracious professionalism they had shown during their initial cultural contacts, as if tourism warfare and heritage preservation were simply different educational programs requiring appropriate implementation. The truly disturbing aspect, entertainment mogul Krex Party had confided to his cultural tribunal during his commercialization crimes hearing, is that they don't seem to view this as personal revenge against the tourism industry. They're prosecuting us for violating galactic cultural protection law, not for entertainment vendetta. They approach tourism resistance the same way they approach heritage preservation, as a cultural problem that requires a solution, implemented with appropriate historical accuracy. The galaxy had settled into a new entertainment equilibrium, one in which humanity occupied a position of cultural respect that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the knowledge that they had earned their heritage position through genuine commitment to historical preservation. The fact that they were also capable of reducing hostile tourism operations to their component cancelled reservations was simply an interesting footnote to their cultural credentials. Tourism Director Flux Vibe had filed his final report on the human cultural reclassification with a sense of professional humility mixed with entertainment industry pride. The Commission had updated their assessment protocols to include questions about voluntary technological constraints and had established new categories for species whose cultural capabilities didn't match their preservation preferences. The truth, which had been carefully documented in classified tourism files, was that humanity had taught the galaxy a lesson that no previous primitive culture had managed to deliver. They had demonstrated that true cultural strength came not from the ability to destroy entertainment operations, but from the wisdom to choose when technological applications were necessary and when they were not. The memorial to the 3 billion culturally displaced humans had been built on Luna, a simple monument that bore the inscription, "They lost their heritage communities, teaching the galaxy that choosing historical preservation requires the strength to enforce it." The memorial had become a pilgrimage site for beings from across known space, all of whom had come to understand that they had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic tourism history. Humanity had unleashed the monsters, all right. The monsters had turned out to be the galaxy's assumptions about the relationship between cultural preservation choices and technological capability. And 3 billion cultural casualties had been the admission price for that particular education. The universe had become a more interesting place to visit when its most dangerous species preferred historical demonstration to technological exhibition. It had also become a safer place for authentic cultural experiences, as long as everyone remembered that the most effective technological civilizations were often the ones who chose not to demonstrate their contemporary capabilities. After all, the humans were still hosting traditional craft festivals and maintaining historical preservation communities. They just happened to be doing it from ships that could neutralize entire entertainment empires, and somehow, that made all the difference in maintaining galactic cultural authenticity.